The oubliette, meaning to forget in French, describes a dungeon so horrifying that its victims were simply left to rot. Prisoners were thrown into deep, narrow pits or small, enclosed rooms with no room to sit, stand, or lie down. Often, these cells were already filled with decaying bodies, and rats had developed a taste for human flesh. Some oubliettes have been discovered centuries later, still filled with skeletons. One infamous oubliette was found in Leap Castle, Ireland, in 1900. During renovations, workers discovered a hidden chamber filled with human remains, so many that it took multiple cart loads to remove them. Some prisoners were kept alive for years, given only minimal food and water, forced to listen to the sounds of life outside, a life they would never experience again. Scaphism. In ancient Persian punishment, scaphism ensured a slow and horrifying death. The condemned was placed inside a wooden boat, their arms and legs left exposed. They were forced to add massive amounts of milk and honey, both to sustain them and to induce severe diarrhea. Coated in honey, the victim was left floating in a lake, attracting swarms of insects, rodents, and wasps. Over days, their body was eaten alive by parasites and burrowing insects. Gibbeting. Gibbeting was a public execution method used in England and America. Criminals, particularly murderers and pirates, were locked into metal cages shaped tightly around their bodies and suspended in public places. Left to die from exposure, hunger, and thirst, their decaying corpses would remain in the cages for years. Some remains were reported to have hummed for over 20 years, polluting the air with the stench of death. Rat torture. This method involved placing a rat inside a clay bowl, which was then placed upside down on a prisoner's stomach. The back of the bowl was heated, causing the rat to panic and burrow into the victim's flesh in an attempt to escape. This method was often used to extract information, though most prisoners died before they could speak. Poena Cullei. A Roman punishment reserved for those who murdered their family members, Poena Cullei was both bizarre and terrifying. The condemned was sewn into a large leather sack, along with a dog, a rooster, a monkey, and a viper. Once the sack was tightly sealed, it was thrown into a river or the ocean, leaving the person inside to drown in utter chaos. The thrashing animals inside would attack each other and the condemned in a desperate fight for survival. Later variations allowed the convicted to choose between the sack or a gruesome execution in the Colosseum. Impalement. Used across various cultures, impalement was one of the most agonizing ways to die. Most recently used in Egypt in the 17th century, it was reserved for criminals such as grave robbers and rebels. A large wooden stake, sharpened at one end, was inserted into their body through an incision, often made at the rear. The stake was then hammered further in, sometimes emerging through the mouth or shoulder. In some cases, the stake was placed carefully to avoid vital organs, prolonging suffering for hours or even days. Entailed bodies were often displayed publicly as a grim warning. Death by elephant. In India, crushing by elephant was a brutal execution method, especially during the 19th century. Crimes as minor as failing to pay taxes could warrant this horrific punishment. The most terrifying instance was under the 4th Mughal emperor, who once ordered a mass execution purely for entertainment. Criminals were placed on the ground, and a trained elephant was guided to step on their heads or limbs. Some were subjected to slow, torturous deaths, where the elephant would crush them limb by limb before delivering the final blow. Keelhauling. Used as punishment among sailors, keelhauling was a maritime nightmare. A condemned sailor would be tied with ropes, looped around the ship, and thrown overboard. The crew would then drag the sailor underneath the ship, scraping their body across the sharp barnacles covering the hull. If the sailor survived drowning, he would emerge with his body shredded like cheese. Even if he was released, infections from the deep wounds would often finish him off. The rack. The rack was one of the most infamous torture devices. Designed to extract confessions, it consisted of a wooden frame with rotating rollers. The victim's wrists and ankles were tied to these rollers, and with each turn, their limbs were stretched painfully. The pressure would dislocate joints, tear muscles, and sometimes break bones. Many victims, desperate for the pain to end, would confess to crimes they never committed. However, if authorities believed the confession was false, the torture continued. One of the most horrifying cases was that of Askew in 1447. A 25-year-old woman accused of heresy. She was stretched on the rock for hours, leaving her completely paralyzed. Unable to walk, she was later carried to the stake and burned alive. The Rat Dungeon. In medieval London, the Rat Dungeon was infamous for its terrifying cruelty. Located in the Tower of London, this dark, underground cell was connected to a nearby river. As the water levels rose, rats living along the riverbanks would be forced into the dungeon, where prisoners were shackled in complete darkness. The unfortunate souls trapped inside never saw the rat, only heard their scurrying feet as they swarmed. The rats, driven by hunger, would begin gnawing at the prisoner's flesh. While the prisoner might manage to shake them off at first, exhaustion would inevitably take over. As they slept, the rats continued their feast, leaving them covered in bites. By the end of the medieval period, the rat dungeon evolved from punishment to execution. Prisoners were simply thrown inside and left to die. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like to discuss it or suggest new ideas, feel free to leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing content. See you in the next one.